When designing an army for Age of Sigmar, or indeed any other tabletop strategy battle game, it's no good just jamming in whichever units you think look prettiest if you wish to be competitive. In the last episode, we looked at the benefits of synergy. Check out the link up there if you didn't catch it. In this episode, we're going to take a look at 5 of my favourite general strategies and how we can build an army around them. When deciding upon a strategy, it is important to adopt one which suits your personal style of play and may be accomplished by your army of choice. Once I've gone through my 5 preferred strategies, I'm going to discuss some further thoughts on adopting one of them. For each strategy, I will describe the general idea behind it, as well as the most prominent advantages and disadvantages. So first up is the Pincer. 2 hard-hitting blocks within your army which attack 2 weak points in your opponent's force. This may well be both of their flanks, with the possibility of some other forces advancing in the middle in a position to reinforce either side as necessary. The advantages are that by attacking your opponent in 2 areas, you may cause indecision when it comes to reinforcing the attacked positions, and mistakes are more likely to be made. Depending on the objective, you may also be in a better position to accumulate victory points. The disadvantages are that you are splitting your forces up into 2 parts, which may be out of range for beneficial aura type buffs from certain heroes. Also, if it goes badly for one of the blocks, it is much more difficult to reinforce it with the other. Double Wave. A fast wave of cavalry type units which will smash into your opponent's forces, weakening their units and covering the approach of slower infantry type units. The idea is that the cavalry wave may be destroyed, but will cause enough damage for the infantry units to mop up the remains. This may be particularly suitable for fast units which get special bonuses on a charge. The advantages are, for a very attack-minded player, you are getting into close combat very quickly. You are likely to reduce missile fire damage to slower infantry units and making it more difficult for your opponent to avoid them. It is a simple strategy that doesn't require much adjustment based upon terrain, the opposing army or the tactics used by your opponent. The disadvantages are that you will be throwing what is likely to be no more than half the points cost of your army into the full enemy army. Enemy reserve units could be used to surround the first wave or to attack the second wave, thus splitting up your forces for longer than you intended. Fire and counter. For an army with a significant amount of missile fire, even if not at long range, you could arrange forces to cover approaches with heavy fire as your opponent advances. The general idea would be to focus fire on individual units, especially dangerous ones, rather than split fire amongst lots of units doing only superficial damage to each. You would then have close combat units in position to counter the advancing forces, picking on weaker areas of the line, which will inevitably lose their shape as they race forwards quickly to avoid the heavy missile fire they are taking. The advantages are that this forces most opponents to commit forwards, with it being impossible for them to hold their line unless they advance at the rate of the slowest units. This means that weaker points in the line will be exposed, which you can take advantage of with fast attack close combat units. The strategy allows you to focus individual units at a time and potentially take out strong opposing units early in the battle. The disadvantages are that it makes it more difficult to grab objectives outside your deployment zone without losing your missile fire capability, as you are likely to have to forego a run move. Moving forwards, even with the standard move characteristic, closes the gap between you and the opposing army, which wants that gap closed as soon as possible to redress the balance of shooting phase losses. Absorption Shield. Using large blocks of highly resilient units to tie up opposing units, while more powerful units pick and choose their targets. This could include blocks of units which are easily replaced, such as summonable death troops, or ones which are difficult to harm, such as large units of Nurgle plague bearers. For example, a unit of 30 plague bearers is at -2 to be hit by missile weapons and -1 to be hit in close combat, as long as it maintains at least 20 in the unit. In addition, it can ignore unsaved wounds and mortal wounds on a 5+. The advantages are that this provides flexible options between blocking off intended lines of attack from your opponent and reliable capturing of battle objectives. They may be used to take out even strong opposing units slowly over time, whilst taking relatively few risks in return. The disadvantages are that these units are generally low damage dealers, slow, and will cost a lot of points to field in sufficiently great numbers. Although good at holding objectives, they are not likely to be the first to arrive at them, and so may have to push opposing units off them, something they are not likely to be able to do very quickly. Finally, summon the Horde. Packing the roster with lots of cheap units, the idea being to swamp the board with multiple units, some of which may sacrifice themselves by blocking opposing units, whilst others capture and hold objectives. The sheer number of attacks that may be dealt, especially with short-range missile weapons such as javelins against a single target, could be used to cause significant damage on opposing units. The advantages are that it's extremely difficult for opposing armies to manoeuvre due to the enemy units spread out across the battlefield. It's also difficult for the combat units to deal sufficient damage, as each individual unit will be of low value and there'll be too many of them for the number of turns available in a game. Units which have the option of retreating during the combat phase are especially good at this, for example skinks. If the skink player chooses to retreat when it's their turn in the combat phase, then they are only sacrificing half of the units that they have in each combat turn. There is also no certainty that those who are attacked would even be wiped out in a single combat phase, and the survivors would still have the option of retreating as well. The disadvantages are that such an army may not be able to capture objectives if a resilient opposing unit is already able to capture it. It could be vulnerable to destructive spells, even if the damage isn't in the form of mortal wounds. Such units generally don't have a good save. Even -1 rend is enough to negate the armor save of such Horde armies. So, with each of these 5 strategies, it's worth considering which ones your allegiance could be best at. But what you should most definitely decide is which ones you would enjoy playing. For a player who likes to rush into close combat, you are unlikely to want to adopt a fire and counter or summon the Horde. Your natural inclinations would cause you to adopt tactics which aren't consistent with the overall strategy. That would lead to failure. It's also the case that some armies will naturally be better at some of these strategies than others. The important thing will be to build your army around a general strategy. Be critical of your army roster and ask what role a particular unit is expected to carry out within that overall strategy. If it isn't easy to make the case for the inclusion of that unit, then it should be dropped for one more suitable. It doesn't matter how good a paint job you did on it, it doesn't matter how pretty the unit looks. It just doesn't work. So I hope that gives you some useful information for army building. If you enjoyed the video, then please click the like button and subscribe for further content. Comment down below with your thoughts on the subject and share with other people who may also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.